Hello, everyone. It has been a while. If the players get a summer, so do I. So I thought, sod it, why not? But we have a new manager. I was going to put a video out earlier about it, but work and other things and everything gets in the way of things at this time of the year. And when you're not expecting the announcement to come out and it comes out of the blue, you're not prepared for it. So we have managed to get this penciled in, and I'm glad to say that. Got Craig coming out, and obviously a fantastic co-host, and obviously a Bournemouth fan. So we'll know a lot about our new manager. Which, if you haven't already known, then where have you been hiding? It's Scott Parker. Scott Parker was confirmed as Burnley head coach on the 5th of July, I think, on a 3-year contract. He's obviously had 2 promotions to back up his CV, so it's not too bad. Let's give the man time. You know, a lot of people out there saying it's not good enough, it's not good enough. But Dash was an unknown entity. Eddie Howe had a little spell with us as well. You know, so we have got a few Bournemouth connections there with Craig as well.
Yes.
But yeah, it's Scott Parker as the new Burnley manager. I mean, first up, Craig, how are you? How's
Yeah,
things? How's your summer been? All good?
yeah, very, very good. Thanks, mate. Very good. Yeah, been enjoying the lovely weather. No, it's been terrible weather, hasn't it? Has it really been a summer? No, not really. We've had
I
a
live up
couple of
north.
days.
Literally, if the sun comes out from behind a cloud for more than 3 seconds, that's summer.
Yeah. Yeah, to be honest, it's been pouring with rain down here, pretty much consistently. I think a couple of months back they said it was the driest. I think it was May, driest May on record. How they got to that, I don't know, but you know,
Wow.
yeah, it wasn't. It was miserable. So yeah, I think they've just made that up. But yeah, good to be on here with you, and I'm going to give you the lowdown on some of the most exciting football you are going to watch. Can you hint the
You said
sarcasm
that through
there?
bated breath there, didn't
Yeah.
you? You really said that through bated breath. Um, Obviously, yes, Scott Parker has
Yes.
been announced as Burnley manager. And strange appointment, absolute strange appointment. And we didn't understand why it took so long to come about. This is a manager who's been out of work for quite a while now. Obviously, I think he said in his press conference prior to, well, after confirming his appointment, that he'd been working with Thomas Tuchel during the time and period away, which don't know
Mhm.
whether that's a positive or a negative. Especially if we spoke to him not long after his Chelsea days, I'd say it's a negative. But
Yes.
if he's got stuff regarding with Munich and things like that, who knows? But this is a manager who has obviously a promotion with yourselves to the Premier
Yeah.
League, a promotion with Fulham. Uh, I mean, go back to when he was appointed Bournemouth manager. What was your thoughts at that point, and obviously where you were? Because you just gone through. I think at the time, hadn't you had Howe, and then Howe left. Tyndall came in for a bit,
Yeah.
didn't he? And then Scott Parker was announced.
Well, in between that, Jonathan Woodgate, because Tyndall
Yes,
was
Johnny Woodgate.
sacked. Um, I think it was about March time. And then Woodgate managed to get us into the playoffs, got us a playoff semi-final against Brentford, which, to be honest, we was in command of until Chris Metham did something really ridiculous, and then just the tables completely turned on us. But to go back to your original question, I was fairly excited by Scott Parker coming in. Firstly, he'd got Fulham promoted. Um, he didn't keep them up in the Premier League. He was a man that they wanted to replace Eddie Howe at the time. But of course, following Fulham's promotion, he stayed there, which I completely understand. That makes sense. What didn't make sense at the time, but does make sense now, is how negative the Fulham fans were about
Mm.
Scott Parker, and a lot of them warned us about his negative style, not being able to handle Mitrovic, who, of course, the season we did go up under Scott Parker was an absolute machine. Um, there was, smatterings of boring football, very negative football, and but we gave him time. We did give him time. And to be fair, at the start, it was very, very exciting. From his first 15 games, he got 37 points. Now, keep in
Not bad
mind,
that.
no, it was a really really good points haul, and also it was with quite a depleted squad. Now, just going back a little bit, just so it makes sense to the Burnley fans watching. Um, After Howe left, of course, Tyndall come in, and Tyndall, of course, he's number two to Eddie Howe. Personally, he's a coach. He's not a manager. He's a fantastic coach, but just is not a manager at all. Some people.
Front of camera, but that's about it.
Exactly, exactly. He is the focal point of everything. But yeah, Tyndall coming, and do you know what? He made a good try of the job. He started very, very well. And I thought, okay, Tyndall, because of course he'd had some bad luck beforehand. Of course, he'd been at Weymouth as manager, didn't really succeed there. And I thought, right, okay, he's got this. He's learned from Eddie Howe, one of the greatest managers ever, you know, in my opinion. Of course, I'd say that. Of course, I'd say that. We'd still be in League Two or worse if it wasn't for Eddie. Um, and the problem was when things went wrong, Tyndall wasn't able to put them right. Now that is the sign of a good manager. Is
Yeah,
when things do go off the rails. You know, how are you going to change it? How are you going to affect it? Who are you going to bring in? How are you going to change the formation? When you go behind, what are you going to do? Tyndall didn't seem to have any of that in his locker. He seemed to have the players on side. There was no doubt about that. The players loved him. He was somebody who was probably a bit too close to the players, in fact.
yeah,
And then, of course, he was sacked. And Jonathan Woodgate actually did everything that Tyndall hadn't. And he put those issues right. The reason why I refer to this is because Woodgate, I think, was very, very unlucky not to get the job. Personally, looking
mm,
back now, I would have given Woodgate the job because I think, he had something good going. We did stumble a little bit towards the playoffs, but I think he did make a lot of changes. We was beaten by Wickham towards the end of the season that year, but he put the squad in a good place. The squad knew what they were doing. Of course, Scotty Parker come in, and he he kind of rode that. It was depleted, the squad, but it looked very, very promising. 37 points from the first 15 games. We was talking about points records. We was talking about
yeah.
taking that points record off Reading, and I thought this is going to happen here. You know, we've hit the jackpot. And then things started to go wrong. Gary Cahill, who I think was, a
Yeah,
stroke genius actually bringing him in, because even from the sidelines, he was quite pivotal at the end. Um, when he got injured against Millwall, just some of the wheels started to fall off. And this is where Scott Parker really struggled and went into this negative style that the Fulham fans had warned us about all along. We was defending deep. We wasn't controlling games against teams that we should have done, the likes of Derby County, the likes of Reading, um, you name them. We were not controlling games, and it showed towards the end of the season that we just scraped through. Now, don't get me wrong. The performance against Nottingham Forest, because there was a point where we actually dropped into third. We managed to get back into second, and I was a little bit worried. I was a little bit on edge because I thought Scott Parker had kind of lost it. One of the games that really shone for me was against Swansea City. Now, Swansea, and I think they still do this, to be perfectly honest, when we played them last season in the FA Cup, they leak goals for fun, but they
yeah,
have quite a dangerous attack. Um, and knowing that, instead of going from the off with the quality that we had in the side, we had Dominic Solanke, we had Kiefer Moore, who was pivotal in turning that game around. With those sort of players in the squad, we should never have been 3-0 down. But that was all down to Scott Parker because he thought, right, okay, I'm going to defend and just try and nick a 1-0 win. And it's not the way that you play against Swansea, a side that, were conceding goals for absolute fun against teams at the bottom end of the division as well.
Mm.
You know, it should never, ever, ever have got to the point where we're 3-0 down and go, right, what do we do now? Nottingham Forest have managed to get themselves into second place and then have to pull a rabbit out of the hat to actually, turn that game round, give ourselves the advantage going into that big game against Nottingham Forest. Don't get me wrong, when we played Forest, he showed a bit of class. He got, and if you've ever watched it, and I would encourage everybody to watch it. It should be on the AFC Bournemouth official channel. He actually, the team talk he gave at half time was fantastic. It was stellar. It was
Yeah.
brilliant, brilliant team talk. And, it fired the players up. We won that game. We won promotion. Great. But it shouldn't have ever been that difficult. We should, in my honest opinion, regardless of how prolific Mitrovic was, from the position that we was in and the points we lost, and go back to Reading at home. Reading at home was one that was a real bugbear for me. So they were poor. They were
Yeah.
poor. And we just didn't break them down. We just sat back. We got 1-0 lead. And then he made such a strange tactical substitution to defend even further. We could have been 5-0 up, had we gone for it, had we taken our chances. You know, it was a game that if we had carried on, or gone into an attacking mode, we would have won convincingly. But instead,
Yeah.
we sat back, and to be fair, Reading equalised and should have probably won the game. And we had a number of those occasions. Derby did,
Mm.
went to Derby and we got beat. Um, Scott Parker, therefore, in my eyes, is a very good manager of hanging on the coattails of what a previous manager's done. Now, from my opinion of Burnley, you got off to a very, very slow start last season.
Yeah.
Of course, it was our first win when you come down to Dean Court. It sparked Andoni Iriola into life. There was questions at the time. Bill Foley was down. He was going to get sacked. Everything was going to go wrong. I was going on about Jesse Marsh coming in because I thought, well, we've got that Leeds connection. We've got so many players that know how Jesse Marsh plays. Let's get him in. He's not my number one choice, but he's going to get points on the board because in a moment we're going to be in a real relegation dogfight because there was games, and just to touch on it, there was games against Everton, away. Everton were not very good that day, but we
Yeah.
were just worse. We were absolutely atrocious. Brighton away, we went 1-0 up. I thought, okay, good. It's clicked. We conceded, a bit of miscommunication at the back. And then how you do this, Dan, I don't know. But from our own kickoff, 15 seconds later, the ball was in the back of our net. So we'd gone 2-1 down. So there was a lot of question marks over Iriola. But just to come back to the point, um, Vincent Company, towards the end of his time at Burnley, really picked it up. But it was, as you will all know, it was too little too late.
Yeah.
And it was a real, real shame because I could see things happening. When we come up to Turf Moor as well, personally, I think that Burnley were the better side. I do. I honestly do. But the thing that was lacking was that you couldn't put the ball in the back of the net.
Yeah.
And
Simple
that's
as that.
why, yeah, that's why, we ended up getting the points. So there is, there's certain things that I think, of course, he's going to ride upon
I
for a
was
long
going to say
season.
that, like, he's inheriting a Vincent Company side that
Mm,
has, very young talent that
yeah.
are probably still very willing to listen to a manager that's coming in. They've got this attacking demeanor about them. They want to get the
Mhm.
ball down, play football. Is he going to is he going to be able to handle that, in your opinion? Do you think he's going to be able to handle? I'm not saying he's going to come in and expect to play the same way Vincent Company did. Obviously, he's going to have his own little tweaks and
Yeah.
ways and means of doing it. But again, it's worrying from what you say that he literally rides with how it is and will somehow change it into something that could be perceived as boring. I mean, we've seen boring football.
Mhm.
When we look back at the Dash football, yes, it was boring to watch, but it got results. And I
Yeah.
think, if anything, you don't give two shiny shots. If you get the
Mm.
result, are you bothered about the way you play? I mean, it's all well and good getting the accolades off Klopp and Pep saying, "Oh yeah, Burnley playing beautiful football. They don't deserve to be where they should be." But that's not getting you results at the end of the day. I think that's why people scrutinise managers like Big Sam and things like that, and they just sort of palm them under that category of, yeah, it's boring football. Yeah, but if you're ever in the shit, who you
Mhm.
going to call? So
Yeah,
um,
exactly.
it's a tough one. But do you think Scott Parker can manage this current crop of young talent at Burnley Football Club?
I think he'll get off to a very, very good start. And this is what he does. He'll get off to a good start because he's riding the coattails of what Vincent Company has achieved, what the side that Vincent Company has built. As soon as players get injured or suspended, this is where it all goes a bit wrong. It all goes a bit wrong. And, talking about sexy football, this is going back to something that is probably worse than what you had with Sean Dyche, because Sean Dyche, yeah,
Really?
at the end of the day, it, they used to say, Dyche played
Yeah.
anti-football, but it was effective. It kept Burnley in the Premier League for so many years.
Got us to
Likewise,
Europe.
exactly, and look at Everton. Everton,
Yeah.
are in my eyes crap. They are
Yeah.
absolute toilet.
Survived by the skin of the teeth the last 2 seasons.
Yeah, but it's through Dyche and the way he
Yeah.
plays, and this is a different type of anti-football, because what Scott Parker does
Oh, you're gonna
is
tell me this is like your second anti twice removed or something?
he
And
par-
style of football.
he parks the bus. I was worried because we were playing sexy football last season, and I even said it on our preview. I said, you know, it's nice, it's good to watch, but it's not effective.
No.
And I think, unfortunately for Vincent, and of course, what Bayern Munich have seen is that there was that uptick. He got it right at the end. Now, with, and not being disrespectful here, with better players, the likes of Harry Kane and Michael Olise, who's just gone to Bayern Munich, you know, they're going to be able to adapt to his style, which was quite a change, really, from beforehand. Also, what you've got to keep in mind is what works in the Championship doesn't always work in the Premier League. We'll touch on that in a
Correct.
moment, because of course that's very, very relevant to Scott Parker. But Scott Parker will get off to a good start. Things will go wrong, and then you'll have this very negative, very defensive, you'll be struggling to beat the likes of Oxford and Plymouth. You might scrape it, but he does seem to get teams out of the Championship. It is his
Mm.
division. It is a division that he knows well. Don't get me wrong, he doesn't do it attractively, but he manages to do it. When you get back in the Premier League, though, this is where the big problem is, and I can
A
tell
lot of
you, and
people have said this. A lot of people have said this. Obviously,
yes,
he was sacked from Bournemouth following a 9-0 defeat
I was there.
against
Oh,
Liverpool.
mate, don't remind me of it. It was. I'll tell you what
I
went
saw a
wrong.
picture. I saw a picture where it just shows Klopp got his hand on his shoulder as if to say, "It's all right, mate. Don't worry about it." And it's
Yeah,
just one of those. It's just a bad day at the office. It was definitely a bad day at the office for Scott
yeah.
Parker because he had to go clear it out at the end of the game. So.
Well, he's a good dressed man, but that's all he got
Oh,
the plaudits for in the Premier League. He's his little outfit, with a couple of lines down the side of it. And, to be fair, um, what Scott Parker did when he got into the Premier League, firstly, he really annoyed our owner at the time, Maxim Denim. Now, Maxim is a man that, so just to give you a bit of background on us, we were on -17. You probably all remember the story. Eddie
yeah,
Howe comes in, saves us from dropping out of into the National League, which would have probably killed the club. Um, you know, the ownership was a mess. Eddie Mitchell, sadly, no longer with us. God rest his soul. A man that is very Marmite at AFC Bournemouth. Some people really like him. Some people can't stand him. I'm of the opinion that he did a fantastic job with what he had. He come in, built up more and more and more and more, and then Maxim come in and funded you know our way into the Premier League. It's not all Maxim, of course. Eddie sensibly recruited, but we get back in the Premier League. Now we've already spent quite a bit in the Championship. The wage bill had to come down. Maxim's given a little bit of money to spend before the season even kicks off. Scott Parker's already thrown his hands about and saying, "Look, this isn't, this squad's not good enough." So Maxim managed to help him sign Marcos Senesi, who is an absolutely fantastic player, just not in a Scott Parker side. Um, we started off the season very, very well against Aston Villa. It was quite a surprise. And then we had a combination of Manchester City away, Arsenal at home, and then of course the Liverpool game. The Man City away game, there was no real disgrace. It. I guess I looked at it as we did what we had to do to try and thwart them,
yeah,
but it just didn't succeed. The Arsenal game was a little bit more concerning, though. This is where I want to come to, because the Arsenal game, we conceded 2 goals in the first 10 minutes. Now, the reason why we conceded those 2 goals in the first 10 minutes is Scott Parker sat back too deep and he just let Arsenal pass the ball around in front of us. Now, when you've got players like Martinelli, Jesus, Saliba, Saka in front of you, you don't just let them pass it freely.
no,
And that's why we conceded. They just picked us off at ease. Our players were being pulled all out of positions, and it was only ever going to go one way. Scott Parker then ditched that, and this is what is really annoying about him. He ditched that, and yeah, we got beat 3-0. A William Saliba wonder strike, was the third goal. I've got to be honest, I thought, okay, he's made a mistake, but he's corrected it. Went up to Liverpool, you know, and of course, when you go away to a big side, you've always got that little bit of hope, but you know what's probably coming. Liverpool hadn't hit their stride though so far that season, and I think we just had a little bit of hope of, right, something might happen today. 2 goals conceded first 6 minutes, 5-0 down at half time. We was being torn to shreds. Scott Parker didn't know what to do. We just sat back, we defended deep, and like in the Arsenal game, you had Mo Salah. It was just different personnel,
yeah,
just pass it in front of us, picking us off. To be fair, if Liverpool were more clinical, it would have been the first double figures, s- game in the Premier League. You know, Liverpool should have beaten us 10-11-0, and
oh,
it was embarrassing. It was embarrassing. I even I come out of the stadium, and I was talking to my mate, and we was with a Liverpool fan. He drove us up there, in fact, and I said, I can't see where we're going to go from here. I said, we're not very good, are we? And Scouse had just turned around and said, you shit, mate. I was like, yeah, I know. I can't really argue against that one. When we were leaving Liverpool, though, something else was happening. And what was happening was Scott Parker was throwing his toys out the pram. And by this, firstly, he turned round and said those players that managed to get us up weren't good enough. Now, this, you know, and I spoke to Robbie Savage and Chris Sutton on Five Live on the way home, and neither of them agreed with me, but Maxim Denham, the person whose decision it was, did. Um, he turned around and said that we need to spend more money, that he wasn't supported in the transfer market, even though Maxim had put in quite a bit of money. We haven't got an endless pot of gold. That's the
No,
thing. Even now, even with Bill Foley, yes, we got more money than we ever have, but Maxim didn't have an endless pot of gold.
that's
And
where I think we have so much similarities in terms of
yeah,
we are teams that have punched above our weight and come from the cusp of having nothing.
mm,
So now, you're going to get your fans that expect us to, well, we've been there for a while. We should be rich. We should be this. But that doesn't work. There's
no,
the infrastructure, there's people to pay, there's, catering staff, cleaners, etc., liquor paint for
mm,
stadium repairs and all these things. So, we understand of coming, I'm not going to say you're a Southern Burnley, but obviously, we sort of,
he's fair. No, he's fair. Years ago,
we
we couldn't
level,
clean the bogs. We couldn't
yeah,
pay to clean the bogs. So,
yeah, and now we're both sort of a team that we feel that we're a Premier League club. I think even though we're
mm,
in, obviously Burnley are in the Championship next season, I think we've got all the infrastructure there to be a Premier League club.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, that's the worrying thing, isn't it? People expect that if you can just throw money at it. I mean, Scott Parker has been told that he'll be backed. However, I think Alan Pace has learned
mm,
from his mistake with Vincent Kompany. He headhunted a guy that he wanted, got the man that he wanted. It's almost like fancying the girl at school, and he ended up with her. But
yes,
as soon as his back were turned, she's talking to somebody else.
yeah.
And I think that's what I think. In fact, I think it was Alan Pace who said that. He actually said it's like dating the best looking girl on the estate, and it depends on how long you can keep hold of her. She won't
Mm,
marry her, but however long you can keep hold of her is, depends on her. But the thing as well was Alan Pace and Vincent Company were there. There was
yeah,
no Pace above Company or anything
yeah.
else, and there was too much respect, too much trust were then thrusted into this manager. I think we as a club will have learnt from that and realised that no, this is, and I think that's why we've gone again down the head coach route instead of
Mm.
a manager. But Scott Parker he was head coach at your place, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was. He was. So decisions, and to be honest, this was a good thing. This was a good thing. It was made by Richard Hughes. So Richard Hughes, of course, now at Liverpool. Um,
Hmm.
he was the man that was responsible for bringing in Andoni Areola. He was responsible for bringing in, so many players throughout the years. And to be fair, he did a good job. Ben Pearson, for example. Now I know Ben Pearson's no longer with Bournemouth, but he was a man that we signed from Preston North End for
Solid player as well.
minimal. It, it got us into the Premier League. Now the thing is that Maxim Denham is a chairman that was generous. He always was generous,
Yeah,
but he lived within our means, and that's what we need to do as Bournemouth.
yeah,
Going back to those dark days where we were on the floor, when Eddie Mitchell managed to take over at the club, he realised what a shit show it was. That he went around with a bucket of paint and started painting things to actually clean the place up. So there's a lot, you know, there's a lot to be said, for our football club. And where we've come from. But Scott Parker just voiced it out, said the players weren't good enough, which of course for a very young squad was bad, and that's what I really fear for Burnley. Is, don't get me wrong, he might get you up, but if things go wrong, he cannot. And if Scott Parker is watching this, he cannot ever again do what he did at Bournemouth and start throwing players under the bus when everybody else can quite clearly see it's Scott Parker's fault. Because, and it was proved that it was Scott Parker's fault, because that side kept us up. That team
Yeah,
kept us up. Now, some people might refer back to, okay, Bill Foley come in, you bought a load of players in January. But I would say that 90% of the squad, on the match days from January onwards, and to be honest, we had a bit of a wobble around that time as well,
mhm,
were players that had got us into the Premier League in the first place, the likes of Philip Billing, seasoned professional.
yeah,
Dominic Solanke, he's definitely good enough. You know, People are after him for 65, 75 million now. You've got Marcus Senesi, who he signed, was excellent under Gary O'Neill, who followed him, and also excellent under Andoni Iraola. Lloyd Kelly, again, a player
yeah,
who sadly has left us recently. Unfortunately, it feels like a lot of it's down to some social media criticism of Lloyd Kelly, which is unwarranted. Unfortunately, we've got a couple of let's say every fan base has got them, haven't they?
yeah.
Really,
We all have a group. We all have that section of our souls that like to
yeah.
ruin things
They
for
shout the
people.
loudest as well, don't they?
Yeah,
But um, that side was good enough. And Gary O'Neill showed that. Don't get me wrong. Gary O'Neill's football wasn't what we're experiencing now. Iraola's football is, sexy football and now effective. It took him a bit of time, and I was very, very worried, and that's why I started harping on about Jesse Marsh. But it was effective. Scott Parker's football was not effective in the Premier League. It was. It just basically handed Liverpool the points. It handed Arsenal the points, and it didn't seem like he knew how to actually turn it round. And well, no, I think that's a bit unfair. Actually, looking back, he did know how to change it because he showed it against Arsenal, who was already 2-0 down at that point. He did change it a little bit, but then he reverted back to type. And that happened
yeah,
in the Championship, even though we went up in second spot and, should have won the league and everything. You know, Derby, Reading, you name them. There's so many games. I'm probably missing out games there, but you know, get victories against those two teams combined, we win the league. Job done.
yeah.
Happy days. It was just very, very negative, dire football from a point, and he just rode the coattails. How are the Burnley players going to react? They get back in the Premier League. Now they've already got a bit of Premier League experience. And then Scott Parker takes them away to Liverpool. Touch wood, this won't happen, but takes them away to Liverpool, and you get thumped 9-0. And then Scott Parker turns around and says, "This Burnley team, they're just not good enough. We need more people."
It's trying to
So he's
fend the blame off onto other people, isn't it? By the sounds of it, it's like
exactly.
it's not me, it's you.
Yeah, exactly. He could be turning around and like he did with Maxim, he could say, "Oh, we need more money. I haven't been supported in the transfer market." He's already upset Alan Pace there. Then he's
Yeah,
upset the team. Because he's saying that they're not good enough. And it takes, this is why I've got so much time for Gary O'Neill. It takes a special manager to then lift those players up from that position. You could from what I know, and from speaking to people, and I won't mention the names of the person that's told me this, you could hear a pin drop on that flight home. Firstly, I think Scott Parker had realised what he had said had landed him in hot water.
yeah,
But secondly, the players are thinking, well, we've just been promoted and our own manager's throwing us under the bus. It's just not, it was just completely, completely, completely unacceptable from Scott. And he deserved to be sacked. I said it on the way home. As soon as I found out about it all, I said, you know, Robbie Savage and Chris Sutton completely disagreed with me, but you know, how can you have a manager then taking you into a game against Wolves, which is winnable, which is a winnable game? We
Mhm.
did get a draw in that. It was a very boring nil-nil draw. Probably the best performance. Well, probably the best result, I should say, after getting humped 9-0. But you're going into a winnable game, and you've got a man there stood in front of everybody saying, and all the players are thinking, "Well, you don't think we're good enough? You know, what are we going to do? How are we going to combat this game against Wolves?" Because I know how he would have combated it. He would have just gone straight into type one defensive. Wolves had scored. Oh, might need to change it, but we'll sit back a little bit more, and it just didn't change.
I mean, what was your thoughts on the fact when you saw the headline that Scott Parker had been named Burnley manager? Was it was there a sense of good luck, or was it?
Yeah.
How do you think it will work? I know you said he couldn't.
Mm,
Sometimes he can revert to tap, but do you think that you look at Burnley's squad? Do you think the timeout? Obviously, it didn't really work out for him at Club Bruges
yeah.
either. I think he were only there 5 weeks.
Yeah.
Um, there is a lot of people, especially Burnley fans, that are very hesitant to back this appointment. I know two or three that have said prior to him getting appointed, if Scott Parker is our manager, I'm not coming on. Which I
Mm,
think is tedious and a bit silly, really, because you're a fan of the football. Your football
yeah,
club should always come
of
first, not
course.
the guy who's managing it. Um, Otherwise, I'd have chucked mine under Brian Laws. But uh, but it can't get. I'd like to say it can't get any worse. You can only trust in what you know, and obviously what we're being told, the noise you're hearing from around saying, even from Fulham fans, from Bournemouth fans saying you're going to
Mm,
need all the luck in the world is can be really pragmatic. He can be a little bit about himself, which obviously we found out with Vincent Company. There was a bit of self-loathe there that he was out for himself, and I've never known a club, by the way, have a
mm.
manager and assistant manager get an international job and the Bayern Munich job on the sacking of one of the worst performance seasons. Um, but hey ho. But no, I mean, yeah. What was your first thoughts of Scott Parker coming to going to Burnley? Was it like good luck to him, but at the end of the day, good luck to the fans because you're going to need it.
I was already writing out a sympathy card, to be honest, and for you. But no, to be honest, he will probably ride on the coattails of Vincent Company. I think he's probably got a decent chance of getting you back into the Premier League because that's what he does.
Yep,
It's going to be boring. It's going to be turgid. It's not going to be nice to watch. But at the same time, it will hopefully, fingers crossed, get you there. What happens though once you get there? You know,
that's what a lot of fans are
mm,
saying. If we get there, do we go right? Thank you for your service. We've been promoted.
yes,
Now we need
that's
somebody with an experienced head, and a
yes,
lot of
that's what you
fans have
do.
called for that. Yeah. I mean, what's he like for producing young talent? Is he good at working with youth players and nurturing that young talent through? Have you seen that in his tenure at Bournemouth?
To be honest, when he come in, he did have a depleted squad. There
Yep.
was a number of players that were starting out. Jordan Zamora, Jane
Mhm.
Anthony. Those sort of players that he built the links up, and it didn't do too badly on that front. He didn't do that too badly with the young players. Um, it was when things went wrong. And, of course, having Gary Cahill in there, I think that was a little bit of a masterstroke,
Yeah.
because it gave him somebody to, maybe even take advice from. Um, so, yeah, he will bring through young players. He will give them the chances. Um, but what he will do is he'll just revert to this type. He'll revert to this type. Is he a manager that, a young player would want to work under? Probably not. And the reason being is I don't
Tell me.
think there's much to learn from Scott Parker. Honestly
Yeah.
don't. I honestly don't. If you're a young player and you've got, another manager, you know, waiting in the wings, maybe even like a Daniel Farker or somebody like that, and you've got Scott Parker, you'd probably go to Daniel Farker. A bit more experience of, working with players, bringing them through, nurturing those players. Whereas Scott Parker will throw them in, he'll give them their chance, but I don't think, you know, how he teaches players is necessarily that good. I might be wrong. I might be wrong. Of course, we didn't see behind the scenes, but
I want to say we've had Josh Cullen come
mm,
out since, and obviously Josh Cullen was brought up through. I think he spent a bit of time at Charlton
yeah,
during his career, and I think he was very, very young at that time, while
mhm,
still on the books at West Ham. And he said that he looked up to players like Scott Parker because he had that West
yeah,
Ham connection with Charlton, and
of
he sort of
course.
tried to emulate Scott Parker's game. So we've got a player who, to be honest, Josh Cullen came in second half of last season, was
Mm,
absolutely fantastic. The season prior in promotion was our players' player of the season and fans' player of the season.
mhm,
So if we've got somebody influential in midfield who has once looked up to this man
yeah,
and has now got to put his trust in him as manager, hopefully that can bode well with passing a message on to the rest of the young lads who've probably gone, Scott Parker who?
yeah,
Especially, that's another question. Sorry, actually,
yeah,
a question in a question. But working with foreign players, because
mhm,
obviously Burnley used to be Brexit FC, literally full
yeah,
English band, and now we have, a Swiss international, a Dutch striker, um, South Africans. We are literally multilingual at the moment, and
mhm.
I can't imagine Scott Parker's going to go in there with the translated book for Spain, Germany, whatever, and just be like, "Oh, how do you say I'm going to throw you under the bus? You shit."
Yeah.
So it's how do you think he's going to work with these players that with the language barrier and things like that?
I would ask Alexander Mitrovic because he did do very well with him. I do want to actually make a point, actually, that, I've just thought of, and it's not so much the young players, but dealing with the older players in the squad. Now, I do know of one player that was very, very unhappy with how Scott Parker firstly introduced himself. He left that season. I'm not going to name the player, but from what I've been told, Scott Parker went in there, introduced himself, and then spent the whole training session talking about himself. Now, of course, secondhand information, I can't clarify if that's 100% true,
Hmm.
but that's bad. That's bad.
Yeah,
At the end of the day, Scott Parker, as great a player as he was, you know, him coming in and talking about himself and just bigging himself up, okay, it might be attractive to some of the young players, but the older players are going to think, well, we're not worried about this. How are you going to, what tactics are you going to implement? That's what we're on about.
yeah.
What is our philosophy? What is our goals this season?
It's a bit like
you
the
know
Damned United, isn't it? When that
yeah.
film when Clough went in there, and it was like, well, Revy had stuff about the team, the players, how they set up. You've just
Mm.
come in here and expect us to turn up and win games. It's
You can imagine, actually, Scott Parker doing something like, I don't know if you've ever heard it, the Dean Saunders story when
no.
um, when Brian Clough, I'm sure it's
Oh
Dean
yes,
Saunders,
yes.
yeah, with the flowers. Do you like flowers, son? You can imagine Scott Parker doing the same there. But how he handled Steve Cook, who
Yeah.
this really irritated me because I know Steve well, nice man, a dedicated professional throughout his whole career, a great servant to this football club.
Hmm.
How he handled Steve Cook was diabolical, actually diabolical.
So you
You
wouldn't
know,
say his man management skills are there?
No, he throws him out of the squad from day one, pretty much. You know, Steve Cook. Now, I've done an interview with Steve Cook, and it was actually at that time. So I would encourage anybody to watch it back. I think it was, yeah, it was like 2022. So do go and watch that because it does go into some more detail about this scenario. But you know, Steve Cook, got so many opportunities with Eddie Howe, and of course Jason
Mm,
Tyndall and Jonathan Woodgate. He was the staple of our defence. Scott Parker comes in, rips up the rule book, leaves him out. Okay, fair enough. Steve fighting for his place. He then come into a game against Fulham, and Steve Cook was the reason we weren't beaten by Fulham that day. He was outstanding. He threw his, to be honest, he did one of the John Terry throw his head at the ball, and then
yeah,
he got sold. And it was all because of the way that Scott Parker had managed him. He handled it absolutely atrociously. And you know, my opinion of Scott Parker descended a little bit at that point
yeah.
anyway, because I didn't want Steve Cook to go. But secondly, it showed the man management skills that he's got. And it showed in the Premier League as soon as we got there, how he couldn't change things, how he didn't really know what he was doing. So he's a manager that, you could say a little bit like Jason Tyndall, rides off the coattails, talks a good game. Don't get me wrong, talks a good game. Apart from when he's talking about, players not being good enough when they quite clearly were at the end of the season. But yeah, he talks a good game. But I feel for you guys. I honestly do, because don't get me wrong, I think he probably will do a fairly decent fist of it of getting you up. He might get you up, but what happens from there? I honestly would sack him and run a mile. If I was Alan Pace, I'd sack him, run a mile, and get somebody in there with pedigree of keeping teams, in the Premier League. Sean Dyche might be available at that point as well.
You never know. You never
Go
know.
back to Dyche ball.
Bloody hell. You know what? I actually threw it out. I wouldn't have minded someone like Harry Redknapp coming in. I know obviously there's that connection, but I think
Yes.
Harry's days of managing are probably. I think he's probably too happy now, feet up, living his
Dan,
life.
you should have let me know. I'd have given Harry a call.
I should have done. I should have said, "Don't
Yeah,
worry, I'll have
exactly.
this management situation sorted."
Yeah, there we are. I'll send Harry up and what do you call it? I think he'd do a good job, to be honest.
It would.
Harry never loses it. Harry never
Oh
loses it.
no,
He's sharp as anything. Um,
and he's just won a tournament with England at Soccer Aid, so
yeah,
his success
exactly,
rate's through the roof.
exactly. Honestly, he's a
If that's
lovely
the
bloke.
case, we should have gone for Lampard as well. But the less said about that, the better.
What about Stevie G?
But this is a thing going back to what you said though about
Yeah.
Scott Parker, that he's going in and talking about himself. Where I think with the likes of Steven Gerrard, he was told by Klopp, wasn't it? Look, do some coaching in the reserves. Forget who Steven Gerrard the player is. You
Yes.
know, people are going to talk about Steven Gerrard the player, but you want people to now talk about Steven Gerrard the manager, the next best thing, the next big thing. He's going to go on to
Mm,
be England manager. He's going to go on to be this, not Steven Gerrard the player. Do not take your managerial career and play it off the back of your playing career. This is a clean slate, fresh start.
mhm.
Try and do all this stuff, and I think that's what players that evolve into managers need to do. They need to forget
Yeah.
that playing past. It's all well and good on a training field, showing that you can play a 1-2 and that you can help out the team in certain aspects. But with how fast the game's evolving, they need to understand that this is a fresh, clean slate for them, not just, oh, well, I've done this, I've done that.
Mhm.
Mate, you played in midfield with Kevin Nolan. Calm down, right?
Yeah.
That's it. Just chill out. I mean, I tell you one person we didn't mention.
Mm.
Obviously, he's brought Jonathan Hill with him.
Yes.
Have you got anything regarding Jonathan Hill? Because not a lot of people know about
Yeah.
Hilly, to be fair.
Um, I believe he's quite a quiet man. Not much really was ever said about him, to
That
be
quiet.
honest.
Is that quiet? Is it?
Yeah, he's that quiet. Um, but yeah, going back to your previous point, great players don't always make great managers. Look at
No.
Mourinho. He wasn't a great player. Eddie Howe. Even though he was a legend as a player with ourselves as well, believe it or not.
Bit
Would
sour
you?
when he went to Portsmouth, though, weren't it? But he redeemed
Yeah,
himself. He
exactly,
redeemed himself.
exactly. But would you say that he was a great player? No. Um, the only manager that you could really, really, really say was great player and great manager is Pep. Um, you
Yeah.
know, and Vincent, hopefully, fingers crossed, will do a good job at Bayern Munich. I do like
But we all
Vincent.
know why that move came about, because he'll have his little spell at Bayern Munich. If it works out well for him, when Pep leaves Man City, there's a vacant position going there, and it's just a simple
I
transition.
think why they've hired him is because of that upturn in form. You could
Yeah.
see what he was trying to do. Whereas that's going to be the difference. And if there's one thing that I can leave you on, you know, you could see what Vincent Company was trying to do. You're
Hmm.
not going to see that with Scott. You're going to be working out and trying to think, what
Oh,
the bloody hell is he aiming for? Yeah,
Rose
so
Ed.
there's yeah, well, just sit back, park the bus, and let a team pass in front of you until you get a little breakaway. It's dire, mate, and yeah, I feel for you. Surely there
Hopefully
was
he's
better
learned.
people out there, weren't there? I could have applied for the
Oof.
job, and I think I'd done a bloody better job.
Probably. Like I said to you off camera that I don't think he's a lot of people's first choice. I think
Yeah,
paper outlets and media have already said to him that fans going off previous aren't really, you know, don't know what to expect of you. They're not
yeah,
really not knowing what you're going to bring to the table. You've got a lot of
mhm,
people to sort of turn around.
yes,
And I think that's the best thing you can do in management is answer your critics, isn't it? I think that's
of
the
course.
best sort of medicine. Fingers crossed he's learnt a lot after his time out, and he changes and adapts and is more pragmatic with his approach. But
Mhm,
time will tell. Time will tell.
yes,
All I can say is thank you very much, Craig. I know you've got to get off for a meeting, but
thank
yeah,
you
tell
so
people
much,
where
Dan.
they can show support to you, your channel, and things like that.
Yeah, no problem. So the channel is called Up the Cherries in all departments, abbreviated UTCIAD. So if you type that into Google, you find it. I would definitely, off the back of this conversation, have a watch of the interview with Steve Cook.
Mm,
It is halfway through. Where we do talk about Scott Parker and that. Like I say, it was done a couple of years ago, but it is still relevant. But yeah, you'll be able to see Harry Redknapp. We've also had special guests on there recently as well, Dan. So Peter Hooton from the farm,
yeah,
Gaz Whelan, Happy Mondays, Richie Neville, everybody likes a bit of five, and also the front man of Kasabian, or was front man Tom Meehan as well. So
yeah.
yeah, do go check us out, and no, appreciate you having me on today. Really enjoyed it, Dan.
No, thank you for coming on. Hopefully, Burnley fans aren't as put off, but I think the comments and everything, to be honest,
Yeah,
around it, we can only make our own judgment when that time comes. Which we do
mhm.
start the season away at Luton, another former Premier League team, on a Monday night. Should be good.
Yeah.
But yeah, thanks a lot, Craig. Really appreciate it. If you can, please do go check out Craig's channel. If you can as well, while you're here, do drop us a like, share, and subscribe to the channel. It really does help us grow, and you can become a member as well. I think there's a little member button if you
Mhm.
want to support us. But until then, let's put our support in Scotty while he's still here. While he's here,
Wow,
still.
yeah. I
While
was
he's
gonna
here.
say, whilst he's here, and you never know when you do come back up to the Premier League. Fingers crossed for you. Really, really would like to see you to come back up. Then just bring in Gary O'Neill or Sean Dyche. Go back to Dyche. It's up to you. Gary O'Neill or Dyche. The choice is yours.
Time will tell. Thanks very much for watching. Oh, 3 o'clock. 3 o'clock. In fact, while you're watching this, the kit will already be out. But at 3 o'clock today, our new kit gets unveiled. So I'm looking forward to that. But yeah, the kit will be out. So let us know your thoughts in the chat for that as well. But thank you very much for watching. Take care. And as ever, up the clouds.